Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance by Stephen Herrero, narrated by Matthew Josdal. A caution to listeners. Bear attacks are rare, but can cause injury or death. Bears are complex, fascinating animals. As with people, this makes the specific behavior of a given bear at a certain time difficult to predict. In this book, I distill a lot of experience, knowledge, and understanding regarding bears. By applying this understanding, you should increase your margin of safety and enjoyment in bear country. You will find out how unlikely injury is. Even if you act as I suggest, however, I can't guarantee a bear won't injure you. Forward by Paul Schullery. The publication of a new edition of Dr. Stephen Herrero's Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance is a cause for great celebration among everyone who cares about bears and the wild country they inhabit and symbolize. In a lifetime of exploring the scientific and popular literature of bears, I have found no other publication that has done as much to illuminate the world of the wild bear, or to inspire in listeners the necessary passion and commitment needed to respect, preserve, and get along with these precious animals. Much more than a guide to living safely in bear country, it is an incomparable introduction to the complete bear, how they live, why they behave the way they do, and why they are so important to us. I first became aware of Steve Herrero's research in the years leading up to the publication of my book, The Bears of Yellowstone, in 1980. His scientific writings on bears revealed a special depth of understanding, not only of the ecology and behavior of bears, but also of their powerful meaning to human society. In fact, my book featured as an opening epigraph the following statement from one of Steve's early scientific papers. We should preserve grizzly bear populations, not because their ecological function is critical, but because of what they can do for human imagination, thought, and experience. Then came Steve's book. I can best illustrate its impact on modern thinking about bears with the following story. In 1992, it was my honor to serve as co-editor with U.S. Forest Service biologist James Clark of the proceedings of the 9th International Conference on Bear Research and Management, held that year in Missoula, Montana. The lead paper in this massive scientific compendium was written by National Park Service biologist Clifford Martinka and featured the results of a survey he had conducted among many professionals in the world of bear research and management, asking them to list the 5 outstanding bear-related publications of the previous 25 years. Cliff then compiled the votes and presented the 11 top-ranked publications in his paper. Cliff's list reads like a who's who in bear research at the time: Jonkel, Rogers, Craighead, Sterling, Pearson, and others. But by far the most frequently named publication was Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance by Stephen Herrero, which these leading bear professionals listed 50% more often than the second-place publication. This was a remarkable achievement. Although only in print for a few years and written for a popular audience, Bear Attacks had already achieved a uniquely authoritative status among the foremost bear researchers and managers. Steve's work was further recognized in his election to the presidency of the International Association for Bear Research and Management, 1985 to 1987, and his appointment as chairman of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature's Bear Specialist Group, 1986 to 1990. Steve and I have often crossed paths since his book came out. Among many other good visits, he generously agreed to participate in my 1990 and 1991 grizzly bear ecology and management courses at the Yellowstone Institute, where his profound understanding of bear-human relationships was no doubt as fascinating to my students as it was to me. Whether in one-on-one conversations or in front of a large audience, Steve is not only an insightful authority on bears, he's also a wise and sympathetic teacher and a heroic advocate for protecting the wonders of the natural world. And, as this new edition shows, the stature of his book continues to grow. Dog-eared copies of Bear Attacks, many smudged and rumpled from riding in backpacks and being studied by the light of countless campfires, inhabit the shelves of tens of thousands of grateful bear country travelers. Today, Bear Attacks remains an eloquent welcome to the world of bears, and I envy you your first reading of it. Take its wisdom to heart, and the magic of bear country will always be yours. Paul Schillery, Bozeman, Montana. Introduction to the 2018 Revised Edition. A few years ago, in the middle of September, I received a phone call from a woman who lived in the country north of Armstrong, British Columbia, Canada. She was seeking advice about bears. A friend of hers had read Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance, and recommended she call me. The caller had retired to the country after living in big cities most of her life. Part of her retirement dream was to be close to nature. She confided to me, however, that she had been on her acreage for 2 years, but still hadn't even gone for a hike because she was so afraid of bears. I tried to assure her that if she took the time to learn about bears, she could enjoy nature as she hoped. She was one of thousands of people estranged from nature because of fear of the unknown regarding bears. What she knew was that bears could seriously hurt, even kill people. This she read in newspapers and magazines. I tried to put this into perspective. I said bear attacks are rare events. I told her that in North America, there are an estimated 800,000 black bears and 60,000 grizzly bears. Each year, there are millions of times in which each species is close to people and no threat or injury results. I said most people enjoy seeing bears. I was honest and admitted there is some danger. I told her that in Canada and the United States, during the decade of the 1990s, bears killed 29 people. Grizzly bears killed 18, and black bears 11. To put this into some perspective, I mentioned that according to the Globe and Mail newspaper, September 8, 2001 editorial, between 1977 and 1998, dogs killed 250 North Americans. I suggested she read my book and also look at some of the bear safety and behavior videos I recommend. I hate to see people's lives crippled by fear based on ignorance. I wrote Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance for people like this woman. I love people who are drawn to nature and bears and their wildland environment. We can share what is left of our wildland areas, deriving joy from knowing bears are there, seeing their sign, and occasionally seeing one. This coexistence, however, needs to be based on understanding bears' behavior and needs, and minimizing the danger bears occasionally pose. Bear Attacks, Their Causes and Avoidance was first published in 1985 and has been in print ever since. It has sold more than 125,000 copies in English and has been translated into German and Japanese. The book has endured because it offers understanding regarding a topic of vital interest to people who live in or visit bear country. The book is based on 17 years of research and scientific analysis of detailed records of 414 bear-human interactions, 357 of which involved injury or aggression. My gut-level understanding of the results comes from myself and my students having put in tens of thousands of hours on foot, in the field, studying bears from Alaska to northern Mexico, and me personally having had thousands of interactions with bears. My research for this book revealed new understanding and perspective regarding the causes and avoidance of bear attacks. This understanding has stood the test of time, as it should have, since the behavior and ecology of bears were designed by millions of years of evolution and are not going to change in a few years. The fundamental premise of this book is that knowledge of bear behavior and ecology can empower people to decrease the chance of unwanted bear encounters. Should an encounter occur, this knowledge can help to reduce the risk of attack and injury to people and bears. Some of the original findings. There are two main types of bear attacks, defensive and predatory, and different ways to respond to each. Playing dead is your best bet for minimizing injury during defensive attacks, but you must be able to tell the difference between a defensive and a predatory attack. Fighting back using any available weapon is essential in a predatory attack. Most serious or fatal attacks by black bears have been predatory. Certain bears used to feeding on people's food and garbage become dangerous nuisances and, in the worst cases, have killed people. Defensive attacks by black bears are much rarer than their aggressive displays toward people suggest. Most serious or fatal bear attacks have happened to groups of 1 or 2 people. Trails can be designed to minimize the risk of bear encounters. These findings and others have continuing practical application. As a result of my research, I have become friends with 3 people who each lost one eye during a defensive attack by a grizzly bear. I believe that had they followed the recommendations in my book, at least 2, and probably all 3, would still have both eyes. My findings have been integral in supporting the cleanup of people's foods and edible garbage in bear country in much of North America. Problems still sometimes lead to deaths, however, though less frequently than during the 1970s and 1980s. On July 15, 2000, George Toulos was tenting at Camp Run Amok near Hyder, Alaska. Tragically, this campground was within hundreds of yards of the local landfill, where grizzlies, brown bears, had been feeding for years. But in July 2000, there was a particularly aggressive garbage-feeding grizzly, brown, that in the middle of the night killed and partly consumed Toulos. A note about terminology. I use the term grizzly bear to refer not only to bears commonly known as grizzlies, but also to bears usually called brown bears in portions of coastal Alaska. For clarity, I have termed such bears grizzly brown bears in this book. The common name of a bear does not necessarily refer to its color, but rather serves to identify the species. In Chapter 10, I describe different common names, coat colors, and other characteristics of grizzly and black bears. Human food and garbage problems with bears don't stop at country borders. Grizzly brown bears originated in Asia, and a large population still exists on the Kamchatka Peninsula of eastern Russia. A grizzly brown bear killed the man whom I thought was the world's best wildlife photographer, Michio Hoshino, on August 8, 1996, at Kurolskoye Lake on the southern end of the Kamchatka Peninsula. The male bear responsible was not one of the wilderness animals that Hoshino loved so much and photographed so beautifully. The bear that fatally attacked and partly consumed Hoshino had extensive experience with people. He had learned to break into cabins and other places where foods were inadequately stored. A Russian television producer had probably purposefully fed the bear. The bear learned that despite people loudly banging metal objects, and despite being sprayed with aerosols of painful cayenne pepper, if he persisted, he would sometimes get to eat people's food. This was a bear that became more and more bold around people, as experience taught him that people were relatively harmless, until finally officials shot and killed the bear after he had killed Hoshino. The details regarding Michio Hoshino's sad and avoidable death are a stark lesson in the potential consequences of allowing bears to aggressively seek and find poorly stored human foods or garbage, especially when people are camping nearby. Another finding reported in this book that has had widespread influence and application is that trails can be designed to minimize the risk of bear encounters. Had this been the case for a trail that slashed through dense alder shrubs in Chugach State Park near Anchorage, Alaska, Marcia Trent and her son, Larry Waldron, might still be alive. On July 1, 1995. They were running along this limited visibility trail, not making noise, when they suddenly confronted a grizzly brown bear that had killed and was feeding on a moose carcass close to the trail. The attack on the runners was aggressive, brief, powerful, and lethal to Trent and Waldron. I warn in this book that activities characterized by speed, not cautious attention to the possibility of encountering a bear, increase the chances of sudden encounters and related grizzly bear-inflicted injuries. When such activities take place on trails designed without considering bear hazard, then tragedy can result. In this revision, I present new information regarding some of the tools that can help prevent bear encounters and attacks. Cayenne pepper-based bear spray is one of the best new tools available. Andrew Higgins and I did the first scientific published research regarding the effectiveness of bear spray in actual confrontations with bears. I present what we learned in this revised edition. I was surprised at the apparent effectiveness of bear spray when sprayed into a bear's face during aggressive or curious encounters with grizzly bears, and equally surprised regarding the more variable results with black bears. Another new bear safety tool I discuss is the effective, very lightweight, and commercially available perimeter alarm system. This can be rigged around tents or entire camps. When triggered by a bear, the system signals that it's time to prepare deterrence. Like bear spray, they increase confidence for most people and let you relax, get a good night's sleep, unless the alarm goes off, and better enjoy your stay in bear country. I also present a list of the best bear safety videos available and where to order them. I consider videos to be an important supplement to my book. The videos I recommend are ones I have been involved in making. They show the behavior of bears interacting with each other and people, or interview people who have had encounters with bears and then analyze these encounters. The objective is to show viewers how to be less fearful and more prepared and relaxed around bears. For this revised edition, I did not analyze all of the bear encounters that have occurred since the early 1980s, for which I have records. As I said, bear behavior and ecology have not changed much in 20 or 30 years. While there is something to be learned from careful analysis of more recent incidents, that will be the topic of another book. Your best defense in bear country is still your brain, your knowledge and understanding of bears. Once you know enough that you feel comfortable around all but the most aggressive bear, a new world of nature unfolds. I hope this revised edition helps you walk in the woods without an unreasonable fear of bears. Introduction. In June 1967, after finishing my PhD at the University of California, Berkeley, I loaded my family into a Volkswagen bus and started traveling to a number of national parks. We visited Yosemite, Mount Rainier, Jasper, and Banff. Our next stop was to have been Glacier National Park, Montana. "There is no way we are going to Glacier Park," my wife stated firmly. She had a good reason. On August 13, 1967, 2 young women had been killed by different grizzly bears in separate parts of Glacier. We canceled our plans. It seemed as though the grizzlies were on a rampage. Why? No one had been killed by a bear in Glacier National Park before these tragic deaths. The newspapers printed numerous theories to explain the deaths. Dry weather and lightning storms had irritated the bears. The bears had been fed hallucinogenic drugs and had gone mad. One of the young women had been menstruating, and this had attracted the bear that killed her. Grizzlies are always very dangerous and aggressive, and this was normal behavior for them. Many ideas, but were any true? I was both horrified and puzzled by the Glacier Park deaths. Could the methods of science be used to reveal the causes of bear attacks? My PhD was in animal behavior, and so I thought that my parchment would probably help me get research money to investigate. With these thoughts in mind, our travels came to an end. We settled in Harvey Heights, a small rural development adjacent to Banff National Park. We were surrounded by rugged limestone mountains and were in bear country. 13 years later, in September 1980, I was autopsying a bear in Banff Park, searching for clues related to the cause of some of the most gruesome of the grizzly bear maulings I had studied since 1967. Before me and my coworker, John Gunson, was the huge, dark, dead form of a 761-pound male grizzly bear, which we believed was responsible for the death of Ernest Coho, 2 serious injuries, and 1 minor injury. These attacks had taken place over a period of 11 days on the outskirts of the town of Banff. The town's nearly 5,000 residents, as well as tens of thousands of visitors, were living in fear as the attacks continued. As in 1967 in Glacier Park, the questions and speculations multiplied. Was this a bear on the rampage? What was it doing so close to Banff? Why did it attack? Would it attack again? On Sunday afternoon, August 24th, 1980, Coho and his friend Bob Musket, accompanied by 3 boys, had gone fishing in some beaver ponds immediately north of Banff. After fishing, the party split into 2 groups, the boys returning to a train bridge by a game trail, and the men aiming for the same place by cutting through dense brush in a bog. At about 2:15 p.m., the men heard a crashing in the brush, and then saw a bear very close and charging at them. The men shouted to the boys to run, and then ran themselves. In their excitement, each of the men ran in a different direction. The bear ran after Musket, who only got about 20 feet before he fell down. The bear stopped, stood on its hind legs, looked at Musket, but didn't injure him. The bear then quickly dropped onto 4 legs and ran after and attacked Coho, who was still running. Within seconds, the huge bear clasped its powerful jaws around Coho's face and bit. Coho screamed, and within a minute or 2 the bear attacked twice more. Late the next morning, an investigative team at the mauling site found fishing gear and the upper part of Coho's jaw and mouth, with 9 teeth, his nose, and a large piece of his cheek. About a week later, Coho died from his injuries. Later in this book, I will further describe the circumstances associated with the Banff attack and other maulings. My aim isn't to horrify, but to describe attacks sufficiently to characterize and explain them, and then to suggest how to minimize the chance of their occurrence. After we captured and killed the grizzly, which we later positively linked to all of the attacks, we began looking for clues as to why the bear was so near Banff and why it had attacked. In the park warden's garage, John Gunson and I began the autopsy. The grizzly had a healthy set of teeth and seemed to be a middle-aged bear. Tooth sectioning later gave an age of 10. As we skinned the bear, we were further impressed with its apparent health. Along the back and rump, there was more than 4 inches of fat. The autopsy and subsequent pathological work confirmed our impression. The bear was huge for its age, the largest bear on record at this age in either Banff or Jasper National Parks, and in perfect health. We were able to find important clues, however, that partially explained the reason for these maulings. Part of the reason was related to why I believe the 2 young women had been attacked and killed by grizzly bears in Glacier National Park in 1967. The common thread binding these incidents was the history of feeding on garbage and people's foods by all 3 of the attacking bears. For some grizzly bears, this is a specific circumstance that is related to attacks. In this book, I will describe how I think this relationship develops, and I will also stress that this type of grizzly bear attack can be prevented. There are 8 living species of bears. This book deals with encounters in Canada and the United States between people and 2 of these species, the grizzly or brown bear, Ursus arctos, and the black bear, Ursus americanus. It is important to be able to tell the species apart, because this and the bear's behavior are the best guides to what you should do in response to aggression. Throughout this book, I've used the word encounter to refer to any aggressive meeting between people and bears. An encounter may or may not lead to injury. Often, I refer to injurious encounters as attacks. Since 1967, I have tried to document and analyze all known encounters up until 1980 with accuracy. Only one major source of accurate records exists: the files of the national parks of Canada and the United States where the bears live. I have had unrestricted access to these files. The data on grizzly bear attacks in national parks include all recorded injuries between 1872, when the first national park, Yellowstone, was created, and 1980. During this period, park personnel positively identified grizzly bears as being responsible for 111 incidents that resulted in 130 injuries. For various reasons, this figure is a minimum estimate, but because park records are reasonably complete and accurate, I doubt that they underestimate the total by more than 25%. In this book, I will also discuss some incidents that occurred between 1981 and 1984, but these were not included in my larger, systematic database. In my research, I've visited all, except one, of the national parks from Alaska to Wyoming that have grizzly bears. I've hiked thousands of miles of trails in grizzly country, examined mauling sites, and talked with wardens, rangers, research biologists, and others about grizzly bear encounters. Whenever possible, I have interviewed victims of bear attacks. As my experience with bears grew and my research into the causes of injury became well known, I've been called on to investigate some maulings on site, to search for dangerous bears, and to sit on boards of inquiry to determine the circumstances associated with bear-inflicted deaths and major injuries. I've also served as an expert witness in trials where injured people have tried to sue for damages. In conducting further studies of grizzly bear attacks, I wrote to every non-national park agency in North America that has management jurisdiction over grizzly bears. From these agencies, I collected detailed information on attacks that occurred between 1960 and 1980. To a limited extent, I supplemented these records with descriptions of attacks in books or articles, for which I had cross-checks on the accuracy of the encounter descriptions. This yielded records of 33 incidents and 35 injuries inflicted by grizzly bears outside the national parks. Because of incomplete record-keeping, these represent only a sample of these incidents. Besides studying attacks by grizzly bears, I also analyzed 135 records of encounters in which neither a person nor a bear was injured. All but 12 of these cases occurred in national parks. All told, I analyzed 279 records of injurious and non-injurious encounters with grizzly bears. Black bear encounters I treated differently. National park data only covered the period from 1960 to 1980. Over this 20-year period, at least 500 people were injured by black bears in the national parks, but most injuries were minor, requiring less than 24 hours of hospitalization. These injuries were easily understood from summary statistics kept by national parks and my knowledge of black bears. I therefore relied on the national park analyses and entered only selected incidents into my database. There were only 3 records of major injuries inflicted by black bears in 3 incidents in the national parks. Records related to black bear attacks outside national parks were collected for the period between 1960 and 1980 in the same manner as were records of grizzly bear attacks. I usually kept detailed records, however, only on black bear attacks that resulted in major injury or that revealed something new about black bears. Accurate records of deaths inflicted by black bears were recorded and analyzed as far back as 1900. Altogether, I found and analyzed records of 32 major injuries, including deaths, inflicted by black bears outside national parks. A few attacks resulting in death occurred between...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?